2007, and it's only 2011 now, and the entire goalposts have been totally shifted. So the developed countries want to replace the KP with a new treaty, and this new treaty that they envisaged is something that will incorporate a pledge and review system. This is pushed most aggressively by the US. What does it really mean? It means domestic targets based on domestic political realities. Whatever the US thinks it can do, and of course they're not really promising because they can't even get any domestic legislation, so maybe the US might reduce the emissions by 3%, that's what they said. But of course we've also heard people reporting to us that sometimes in private conversations the US actually admits that they can't even promise that because they can't get any legislation through Congress, there's so much opposition, so who knows what the US will really do. But that's what it means. It's just what you pledge to do at home. It may or may not be in domestic legislation. In the EU it is. In countries like the US it's not. And the rules of the KP for accounting, review, reporting, compliance, all out the window. There's something, of course, that they're discussing now on the AWG-LCA side, which is all about MRV, ICA, and so on. But those are much weaker rules. And of course, they're making much stronger rules for developing countries. So they're introducing more obligations on developing countries and weakening the obligations on themselves. And what they want most of all, the continuation of the market mechanisms. With or without the Kyoto Protocol, with or without the second commitment period, this is what they need to continue at all costs so that basically they don't have to actually reduce the emissions at home and the burden is simply transferred again onto developing countries. So of course now you hear many different things being floated around, and there is talk about a political second commitment period, perhaps if a legally binding one can't be achieved in Durban. What's actually supposed to happen is that there should be a formal amendment to Annex B. That's the requirement in the Kyoto Protocol itself. But many developed countries are starting to talk about, well, maybe we can't really have that, it could be political. What they mean by that is maybe they could adopt something in a mock decision, or even maybe just a declaration by the ministers or some other non-binding document. So the big problem is really that they are downgrading all the rules and legally binding commitments for themselves and upgrading all the rules and commitments for developing countries. They're shifting the burden, and at the same time, they're not delivering on the bargain to help developing countries by delivering finance and technology. This really undermines all the principles in the convention, in particular equity, historical responsibility. So how do they want to do this? If you read all the media reports today, you would be totally forgiven for thinking that the only reason we're here in Durban is to launch a new mandate for a new treaty. They're aggressively promoting this in the media, in the public's mind, we're here for a new treaty. We have two treaties. They desperately need to be implemented, but the only reason they're asking for a new treaty is because they don't like the current ones. It's inconvenient, it's not in their favor, and so they want to launch a Durban mandate for a new treaty. Of course, the EU says it's open, and maybe they could consider a second commitment period, but the bargain is that we'll give you a second commitment period, but you have to, in return, promise us a new treaty. In other words, the bargain is we'll enter into a second commitment period. Of course, it's not going to be legal, it's more likely to be political. But here we have to agree that we will launch negotiations for a new treaty. That's the quid pro quo from the EU. Canada, Russia, and Japan have already said unequivocally that they're not going to enter into a second commitment period. And today there was just news, I don't know how verified it is, that Canada plans to officially withdraw from the Kyoto Protocol. So they will be in the same position as the US as a non-party if they do that. And the US even claims, when you listen to them, that they're kind of open to a new treaty and perhaps a new mandate for a new treaty, but only on their terms. It's a take it or leave it situation. Their conditions are No distinction between Annex 1 and non-Annex 1. Everybody has to be treated the same, legal symmetry. Second condition, developing countries' mitigation cannot be conditional on finance. Now, this isn't just about replacing the Kyoto Protocol anymore. This is about replacing the convention. They're asking us to rewrite the convention, its provisions and its principles. That's what the US agenda is about. And if they don't get a new mandate, they'll probably conveniently turn around and blame China for saying that China was reluctant and it's just therefore, and we were kind of open actually. Right? But of course, everybody knows that the US isn't going to agree to a new treaty. So the confusing thing is really that you also hear some developing countries asking for a mandate. In particular, the Alliance of Small Island States has been asking for a new mandate and a new treaty, and also the least developed countries. Some countries in Africa are also doing the same. But the really important distinction here is that these developing countries are asking for a new treaty and a mandate that will sit alongside. This new treaty will not replace the Kyoto Protocol, but it will complement the Kyoto Protocol. It will sit side by side. In other words, developed countries continue to do the mitigation under the Kyoto Protocol, and all the elements of the Bali Action Plan are wrapped up in a final outcome, which is a treaty. So that should only contain the US mitigation, developing country mitigation, and as well adaptation, finance, and technology. So that's a big difference that is not, of course, being picked up by the media. There is this distinction between what developing countries are asking for and what developed countries are asking for. Now, of course, but there's a big risk still, right? Because if we just keep asking for a mandate and there's no clarity about the substance, then what you get in the end might be a mandate. And in my view, it's really highly unlikely that the poor, vulnerable countries' vision of the new treaty would win against the rich and powerful countries who have a very clear, articulated vision of this new, wonderful pledge and review treaty with no rules and no compliance. So this is really the risk of pushing for a Durban mandate. And of course, the whole issue is that it will continue to delay. Developed countries have already been saying, well, maybe 2020. We can't afford 2020. We should have been implementing already the outcomes from the 2 tracks of negotiations in 2009. And of course, in the end, will the US sign up? Will we even catch the US? Or will they continue, as they have in all other fora that have ever been engaged in, to engage in the negotiations, undermine negotiations, bring us down to the lowest common denominator, and then walk away? That's the situation that we're faced with if the demand for the Durban mandate continues. So really what needs to be done is that we need to implement existing legally binding obligations. The instruments that we currently have, the Convention and the Kyoto Protocol, the promises under the Bali Agreement, the mandates for the negotiations that we have now, we need to finish that. And we have to stop shifting the goalposts, allowing the developed countries to shift the goalposts and pretend as if this is what this conference is all about. Thank you.